Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Virus Wars, the show where I talk about bacteria, and also viruses, and parasites, and other creepy crawlies. And together, we can find a world-ending plague that's right for you. Today, we are showcasing the humble flu. Now, some people might think today's choice is a little dull, a little basic, but some people are wrong, because it's one of the most popular viruses in the world for a reason. It's like the vanilla ice of viruses. Hold on, sorry. Let me double check that. It is like the vanilla ice cream of viruses, the public transportation of viruses, the YA fantasy of viruses. Sure, it doesn't have the bleed from every orifice pizzazz of Ebola or the ick factor of worms that crawl into various bodily orifices. The flu, right. Yes, the flu. No pizzazz, but it makes up for it in utility, okay? Versatility, and importantly, pure pedal to the metal grit. It's not flashy, but it sure is effective and good at what it does. And what it does is infect, spread, mutate, repeat. Year after year, decade after decade. If you're looking for a virus that makes a lot of smart and competent people stay up at night looking out the window into the darkness, staring at the cold, perpetual void, influenza is the virus for you. So, to understand what influenza is and why it's so spectacular, you need to understand a little bit about viruses. This is the boring part of the video before we get to all of the havoc and mayhem goodness, so I'll try and keep it short. At its most basic level, a virus is a strand of genetic code that is surrounded by some sort of protective shell, and all of this includes some very basic biochemical machinery. It uses this machinery to infect its preferred host, hijack their cells, make more of itself. Simple. The key thing that makes a virus is that all of the things that it needs to make more of itself actually come from or are made out of the cells that it infects. So, hey, influenza is technically people! Yay! Except bird flu, which is technically birds. Alright, that was boring. Here's a fun fact. Okay? According to a rigid and outdated set of rules defining what is and isn't alive, viruses are technically not alive. Biologists sometimes argue about this in the same way that you and your friend might argue about whether Batman or Superman would win in a fight. It is just as pointless and pedantic to an outside observer. That was a fun fact. We'll have more later, I promise. Anyway, influenza is a virus that infects about 1 billion people per year and kills about 500,000 in what most sane but boring people would refer to as a good year, which is to say, not a pandemic year. I promise we will talk about those later. Now, the more calculator-enabled of you may recognize that the estimated mortality rate for the flu is 1/2 of 1/10 of 1%, or about 1 in 2,000 cases. Again, a sane but boring person might become a little alarmed if you told them that flu season is coming up and they have a 1 in 2,000 chance of dying this year if they catch it, but it's actually not that simple. Because of these 3 reasons. Reason 1. These are the numbers for the garden variety seasonal flu that you catch from other people. A potential pandemic flu, or a flu that has a different animal host but then jumps to people, can be a lot deadlier, potentially, or not. We'll cover all of that later. Reason 2. You're probably watching this from America or Europe, and if we plug your numbers in, it's closer to 1 in 4,000 a year on year for the last decade or two, mostly because hospital access makes a big difference. I do have to say here, these are the best faith estimates using all of the sources available to me, from published papers to the CDC to Eurostat, all that jazz. Honestly, try and find 3 different sources of what the influenza mortality rate is, and you will get 3 different sets of numbers using 3 different types of estimates and standards, and do not. And I stress this emphatically here, okay? Now, there's a real talk for serious regarding the flu or any medical information you look up online. Do not trust anything that artificial intelligence tells you. Just don't. Dive into a bit more yourself. Just trust me on this, okay? Reason 3. Age is the biggest factor in how sick you're expected to get from seasonal flu. If you're aged somewhere between 0 and your mid-50s, the actual mortality risk for you is somewhere between 1 in 5,000 and 1 in 100,000. However, past the mid-60s, the mortality risk starts to climb dramatically, from about 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 20 at around age 85. And your chances of being hospitalized skyrocket as well. And we're not talking the gentle bed rests with attractive nurses fulfilling your every personal desire kind of hospitalization. That kind, unfortunately, does not exist. Although I've got a startup idea. I'm looking for investments, and okay, not the time. Okay, sure. Sorry. Yes, it is not that kind of hospitalization. It is the tubes inserted into every part of your body kind. So keep that in mind. And that's a great point to move to the next section. But before that, I'll leave you with this parting thought. The flu is deadly, but it's not deadly enough. Okay, I realize this can be a little misinterpreted. Please ignore all the suspicious laboratory equipment behind me. Okay, that's not what I meant. All right, what I meant is it's not we need to stay at home kind of deadly, or I need to wear a mask kind of deadly, or I absolutely need to get a vaccine this year kind of deadly. It doesn't inspire caution or alarm most of the time. Only when you start looking at the aggregate numbers, matching mortality incidence to case incidence, do you start to see what a measurable impact it has on people's well-being, on human lives, on the economy. In a sense, it really is the perfect pathogen. All I've given you is a bunch of numbers. And you know what? Numbers are boring. And numbers are for nerds. So let's get to the fun part. The fun part. Fun here being directly proportional to human suffering. Not everyone's definition of fun, but you know. But let's talk about what flu can do to you in the worst case scenario. How exactly do you go from walking and talking to 6 feet under? Well, the flu, specifically seasonal flu, really likes to live in your airways, which is your lungs and some other stuff connected to your lungs. Here, it can spread from cell to cell and from you to others when you cough, or sneeze, or randomly lick strangers on the street, or maybe you don't do that, or maybe it's just me. But anyway, this has a twofold effect. First, your cells get hijacked to make more virus, and that either straight up kills them or causes them to self-destruct. Second, your immune system senses something is wrong and shows up in force to kick the virus out. If you ask your average person what the immune system is for, they'll tell you it's there to fight infection. If you ask a professional, you'll get a 1,000-yard stare, followed by some mumbling about how it's complicated. But for now, think of it as a part of you that can kill other parts of you in order to save the rest of you from anything that it thinks isn't you. Unfortunately for you, it's not super discriminate, it's not super precise, and it doesn't have the moral capacity to be concerned about collateral damage. If you're infected with influenza, best case scenario, and what happens most of the time, is that it works quickly and efficiently and kicks the virus out of your system before you even know you're sick. Worst case scenario, your lungs are ground zero in a protracted battle between virus and your immune system, and basically melt from the inside. I call this process bad lung melty sickness, but a qualified medical professional might call it pneumonia, or in more severe cases, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which, in my opinion, is just not a catchy enough name for something with a 25 to 50% mortality rate. Damaged lungs are also a great place for bacteria to come settle. So now, not only do you have the flu, you also have a secondary infection with one of a select number of bacterial species, which damages your lungs even more, and can send your immune system into total systemic overdrive, as in a full body catastrophe. This is called sepsis. And there's some evidence that influenza can trigger it on its own, but having bacteria in the mix definitely helps. Sepsis is honestly something that can have a whole video dedicated to itself, but the TLDR is that what happens is your blood vessels start leaking fluid, your blood pressure tanks, you can't get blood into your important organs like your liver, kidneys, and brain, and on top of everything, the blood that is going there isn't getting enough oxygen from your damaged lungs. So, your organs stop working, your body goes haywire, your heart stops beating, and that's it. Wow. I might hear you say, you're putting a lot of blame on the immune system, but joke's on you. I don't have one. Guess that means I'm safe. Well, first of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, unfortunately, no. In fact, you're worse off on average. The immune system is a necessary check on influenza, and without it, the virus will spread all throughout your lungs. While it's true that not all viruses kill the cells that they infect, influenza definitely does. And with a dysfunctional immune system, the damage to your lungs tends to be far more extensive. Depending on what the problem with your immune system is, you might not feel the early stages of the flu, like the fever and the fatigue, and only realize you're infected when you start feeling the more serious symptoms, like trouble breathing. Good news, if you're seriously sick with the flu, which is bad news, but there's good news. The good news is that there's a hospital nearby, preferably equipped with critical care beds. There are a lot of things that can be done for you. You have antivirals, respiratory support, vasopressors, a lot of other things. Mostly they're there to keep you alive while your body fights off the infection and starts healing all of the damage. But in serious cases of the flu, this isn't pretty, it isn't fun, and the permanent organ damage that you can get in the process could leave you crippled for what will now be a considerably shorter and more difficult life. So I've told you the numbers, I've told you what they mean, but to understand why and how, we've got to dive into the nerd zone. The nerd zone of how influenza viruses work. Just imagine this as a swimming pool, but a really dirty swimming pool that someone maybe peed into. But we'll keep it brief, okay? We'll just do a gentle dive, maybe put a foot in. It'll be painless, I promise. So the alphabet, right? The alphabet goes A, B, C, D, or A, B, G, D if you're Greek. And influenza viruses go influenza A, B, C, and D, or alpha influenza virus, beta influenza virus, gamma influenza virus, and delta influenza virus. Say it 10 times fast if you're a nerd. If you're like me and can only remember one letter of the alphabet without asking AI for help, you're in luck, because influenza A is the one we're going to be talking about for the entire rest of the video. Because 6 out of 4 experts agree that is the scary one. The rest are less scary and therefore less interesting because of a combination of any of the following reasons, like they evolve slower, they're less likely to cause spontaneous pandemics, or they just don't make you all that sick. Influenza B is a big enough deal to be included in seasonal vaccines, but apart from that, we can just jump back to A. If you're hearing about flu on the news, it's influenza A. Bird flu, influenza A. Swine flu, A. H number, N number, well, that just refers to a serotype of, yep, you guessed it, influenza A. Biologically, influenza A is a simple machine with a set of specific prescribed functions. 1. Get into your cells. 2. Make more of itself. 3. Get out of your cells and into the environment. Fourth verse, same as the first. And the beauty of it is it only needs a handful of genes, making a total of 12 protein products to do all of this. If you need a reminder what genes and proteins are, feel free to pause the video and take a 10-minute Wikipedia break. If you pause the video, my patience is infinite. Literally, I'll just stop, and wait if you pause. But if you don't pause and you're ready to go, all right, let's dive in. Starting with step 1, getting into your cells. On the surface of the influenza virus particle is a protein called hemagglutinin. Helpfully called that because it causes heme to agglute under certain conditions not really relevant to influenza biology. It is also the H in H1N1, H3N2, H5N1. You get the picture. What is relevant is that hemagglutinin grabs onto sugars, which are attached to proteins, which are attached to human cells, your cells. It's not actually known what protein or proteins it attaches to, other than there must be a lot of these on the cells of the airways, since influenza likes to infect these cells the best. After it attaches, hemagglutinin tricks the cell into swallowing the virus using the normal mechanisms that cells use to swallow parts of the outside environment for various reasons. So that's step one. Except I lied, it's not, because now the virus has a problem. It's in a little isolated compartment of the cell, and it's about to be digested into biological scrap to feed the cell. So, it tricks the cell into cutting its hemagglutinin to make a sort of short hemagglutinin spike that it rams into the walls of the compartment and pushes it apart and ejects the core out of it. Now it's properly inside you, and that's step one. So now we get to step two, where the virus makes more of itself. Now that it has ejected itself from the cellular stomach, it's only made out of three parts. The first, viral RNA. Your cells use RNA as a transitionary step to make genes encoded in DNA into protein. Influenza thinks DNA is for losers, and all of its genes are on RNA, which it uses to make protein, which it uses to make more RNA. No DNA step necessary. The second part of the virus is the nucleoprotein, which protects the RNA. The third part is RGRP, which is a protein, or technically a complex of three proteins, that makes more viral RNA from the viral RNA that's already there. Right now, as it just escaped into your cell, all of these parts are stuck together, but from this point, things move quickly. The nuclear protein guides the RNA and RGRP to the nucleus. The RGRP makes more RNA from the viral RNA that it's attached to, and that new RNA is either fated to go inside of new viral particles or make more viral proteins. How does the viral RNA make proteins? Well, it tricks your cells into doing it for it. Right. Okay, the nerd levels are spiking, but we're almost there, so hang on for just a little bit longer. We're on step three, the last step. Step three, get out of your cells, rapid fire. So, viral RNA makes a new protein, NS2, also known as nuclear export protein. This goes to the cellular nucleus and obligingly picks up the viral RNA that's been replicating there, along with the RDRP and the nucleoprotein that the RNA is attached to. RDRP then tricks the cell into sending it to the surface, where the rest of the viral proteins are assembling. Wait a minute, I hear you say. Didn't you say RDRP was the thing that makes more RNA from viral RNA? And yes, it does. Good job for paying attention. But also, when you're a virus that only makes 12 proteins, some of them need to wear a couple of different hats. So RDRP also wears the take your Uber driver at gunpoint hat, I guess. So, now that the viral genome, which is the most important part of the virus, is at the surface, it assembles with the rest of the viral structural proteins and buds right out of the cell, taking a bit of the cell's surface along with it. Outside of the cell, a viral surface protein, helpfully called neuraminidase because it cleaves sialic acid. Neuraminidase, yes, helps soften up the protein matrix and the mucus outside the cell, letting the virus go forth to find new cells to infect or escape into the environment. So now we're done. Yay, we're done. So that was a lot. Okay, that was a lot. But we can reward ourselves now and take a little break with some fun facts. Right? Fun facts. Fun fact 1. RDRP is kind of bad at copying viral RNA. That means with every single cycle of replication, there are a lot of errors and mutations introduced into the RNA. What comes out is not the same thing as what goes in. This is actually a feature, not a bug, because it lets the flu change its shape quickly. That different shape means that the memory component of your immune system, like your antibodies, don't recognize it as well, so it can keep coming back year after year, even if you got vaccinated or infected the year before. If you're wondering why some vaccines out there cover you for life, whereas there's a new seasonal flu vaccine every year, this is why. The technical word for this process is antigenic shift. Fun fact 2. A cell infected by one flu virus will die in 12 to 24 hours, but in that time it can make from 10 to 10,000 new viruses, with an overall average of several hundred. Fun fact 3. Influenza A's RNA is not just one big chunk of genetic code. It is actually 8 separate pieces. This makes people worry, because hypothetically, if the same cell were infected by, say, 3 different strains of influenza, bird, pig, and human, for example, those RNA pieces could mix together into a brand new virus that's part bird flu, part pig flu, and part human flu. This is called reassortment, and is one of the most likely ways a flu pandemic could start. Fun fact 4. I had intended to put a joke here, but as it turns out, I am not very funny. Fun fact 5. I talked about the proteins influenza uses to get into the cell, make more of itself, and get out, but it has a few others dedicated to slowing down the immune response. When your cells are infected, they raise alarm signals. These signals do 2 things. First, they tell the cell to gloriously self-destruct for the cause of keeping you alive. And second, they attract immune cells in your local area to fight the infection. Influenza can't shut this alarm system down completely, but it can delay it for a bit and make it less strong, thus letting itself replicate for longer. You would think this would be bad, but I already described what a hyperactive immune response can do to your lungs, so in a sense, the flu is also protecting you along with itself. When we're talking about seasonal flu, you need to remember that its host is you, and it needs you alive so it can go to the next person, and so on, all around the world, and back to you. As it spreads, it's constantly evolving, making little new substrains of the flu, but the ones that kill too well are the ones that spread the least, so they end up dying off in favor of more competitive flu strains. Fun fact 6. Bird flu doesn't care about you. It cares about birds. So if you ever find yourself with a ton of bird flu in your lungs, you're in for a really bad time. So let's talk pandemics. Actually, I lied. Okay, first, let's talk the immune system. This is the immune system rant. We shall prepare ourselves for the immune system rant. I really didn't want to do this, but I guess we had to, because you're probably asking things like, well, isn't the immune system supposed to protect me from infection? But you're talking like it's the major thing that's hurting me. Yes. And also, yes, you might ask, when we get vaccinated, doesn't that tell the immune system how to fight the flu? Yes, and it's important, but okay, it's complicated. And it's honestly just really hard to talk about the immune system, because you can say, oh, when the immune system sees A, it does B, except for specific cases of A when it does C, and sometimes it does Z for reasons we don't understand, but Th17, maybe. The immune system, I feel like, it's the most actually prone field in biology. You know, at least in neuroscience, it's nerve go or nerve not go. So I'll try and keep it brief. Without an immune system, a virus would spread all throughout your body unimpeded. In fact, all of its target cells, in the case of the flu, all those cells would eventually die from the stress alone. And so, in all likelihood, you would too. If you do have an immune system and it sees a virus for the first time, it goes hard. And it can cause a lot of damage. As a generalization, this is a lot worse for you if you're an adult than if you're a kid, because kids are magic or something. I don't know why, and neither does anybody else. If the immune system sees a virus it's seen before, it ramps up quicker, meaning it's at full strength before there's too much virus around, and it's a lot more precise and elegant in how it gets rid of the virus, so there's less damage overall. The flu lives in a gray area where your immune system has seen it before, but since the flu has changed since the last time it's seen it, you get kind of an intermediate response. When you're old, your immune system is not as good because old people are magic, but like in a bad way, I guess, in this case, which can lead to a protracted battle between the virus and your immune system and progressively accumulating damage from the effects of both. Vaccines, specifically flu vaccines, tell parts of your immune system to make antibodies, which are giant Y-shaped rods where one half sticks to the virus, preferably to the part of the hemagglutinin that lets the virus stick to your cells, and the other half acts like a giant banner saying, hey, come kill this thing I'm stuck to. All right, That was the immune system rant. The immune system rant. Let's I don't know. Let's do a fun fact here. Here's a fun fact. Fun fact 7. Yes, 7. There's a theory entertainingly named original antigenic sin that I'm just not going to go into because it is a weird immune system thing. You thought the immune system rant was over, but I lied. Okay, but now it's over. Now it's really over, and let's move on and talk pandemics. Pandemic is a cooperative board game for 4 players in which you're flying around the world trying to stop the simultaneous outbreaks of a whole bunch of different diseases. I've played it. It's pretty fun. 7 out of 10. A pandemic is also what happens when a strain of virus or bacteria rapidly spreads throughout a large portion of the global population. In 1918 to 1920, a flu pandemic took the lives of between 17 and 100 million people. In 2009, a flu pandemic happened, but went virtually unnoticed by the general public and didn't affect most people's day-to-day lives. The first is colloquially known as the Spanish flu, the latter known as the swine flu. In between those two were the Asian flu of 1957, the Hong Kong flu of 1968, and the Russian flu of 1977. In each and every case, a new strain of flu, different from the circulating seasonal flu, blitzed through the population of the world, infecting a large proportion of people and becoming established as the new seasonal flu, while growing less and less deadly over time. With the exception of the Russian flu, each pandemic happened because of a hybridization or reassortment of a strain of influenza circulating in animals and a human influenza strain. Remember when I said the genetic code of influenza is carried on 8 separate RNA strands, and if you somehow got a bird and a human influenza virus to infect the same cell, you can make a virus that's a hybrid of both. That was fun fact 3, and I lied. The facts are not just for fun, they're actually pretty important. The reason this can cause a pandemic is because the new virus is radically different than what your immune system has seen before. Seasonal flu, you already have partial protection against, like I said. Hypothetical newly reassorted flu? Well, it's still influenza, and your body has seen influenza before, so you'll have some protection. But it's different enough that it's going to infect more and spread faster before your immune system catches up. So when the old and the new virus emerge to infect the general population, the new one gets to replicate more and spread quicker on average than the old one. And since they're competing against each other for their hosts are us, the new one takes over and the old one can just die out. So what actually happened was that the Asian flu of 57 knocked out the Spanish flu. The Hong Kong flu of 68 knocked out the Asian flu. The Russian flu of 77, which was actually the Spanish flu re-emerging through either natural causes or a botched live virus vaccine trial. It's not 100% known. Anyway, that flu partially knocked out the Hong Kong flu, and then they lived together for 32 years until the swine flu knocked out the Russian flu, which was actually the Spanish flu. So the current seasonal year-to-year influenza that you get is descended from either the Hong Kong flu or the swine flu. Okay, I hear you thinking, well, people are always talking about a new pandemic, and really, how worried should I be? Well, first, if you have not yet learned to detach yourself from negative emotions and anxieties, I think now, the year of our Lord, 2025, would be a very good time to start. Second, how worried should you be? Well, nobody knows. Does that make you more worried? It might make some people more worried, but let's look at some of the historical data and break it down. All right, the Spanish flu was one of the worst global epidemiological disasters in history. The estimated case fatality rate was 2 to 4%, or roughly 100 times deadlier than seasonal influenza. For comparison, the case fatality rate retrospectively attributed to the first wave of COVID by the CDC was 1.7%, so roughly just as bad. But moving on to the Asian and Hong Kong influenza pandemics, the estimated case fatality rate for those was 0.2%, so 10 to 20 times less deadly than the Spanish flu, but still roughly 5 to 10 times higher than seasonal influenza. Then after that, the Russian flu and the 2009 swine flu, both of those were about as serious as just the regular yearly seasonal influenza. So what will the next flu pandemic look like? Well, the best case scenario, and something we saw with the 2009 swine flu, is you basically don't notice it at all. Worst case scenario is a pandemic a lot like the one we all went through a few years ago. And ultimately, it's up to freak accidents of nature and evolution, which makes it very hard to predict. You've got a pretty good idea that the next pandemic influenza virus will probably happen through reassortment, which means that some genes from most likely a bird influenza strain and some genes from a circulating seasonal flu strain are going to get mixed up in the blender, with some normal evolution through mutation all on top of that. And it's hard to say up front what the biology of that virus is going to look like. If it happened today, we can say, oh, it's going to be H5N1 or H5N2, but that alone doesn't really tell us much. Basically, the worst case scenario is if this new hypothetical viral strain picks up genes that make seasonal influenza really good at replicating and infecting cells. But it doesn't take the genes that tend to keep its host, which is now us, alive. Here, it might be helpful to take a look back through history and see what was it that made the Spanish flu so bad. Well, first, Europe was in the middle of a war, and censorship was rampant. Rather than risk taking a hit to public morale, most European governments suppressed news of any disease outbreaks. The most vocal early reporting of the disease came from Spain, which is how it came to be known as the Spanish flu. It didn't start there. But when it comes to infectious disease, an informed public is a protected public, and Europe's public was not informed. Second, the year was 1918, and by modern standards, quality of life and general living conditions were not great. People living in cities were packed in tight, and sanitation was frequently a suggestion rather than the norm. If you're human, that's not the best thing, but if you're a virus, it is absolutely spectacular. You love it when people get together, breathe on each other, and don't wash their hands on the regular. Third, Europe was in the middle of a war. And we did this already, but let's talk about something known as the conflict paradox. Imagine if you're an office worker and you get the flu. If you don't show any symptoms, or if you have maybe a cough and some sniffles, you're showing up to work. If you get a fever, or if you're feeling really bad, you're staying home, hopefully. Since how sick you get depends in part on you and in part on the substrain of flu that's infecting you, it's the milder strains of flu that you're more likely to pass on to your coworkers. But imagine you're a soldier and you get the flu. If you don't show any symptoms, or if you have maybe a cough and some sniffles, you're going to the trenches to fight. If you get really sick, you're going back to a hospital behind the lines to mix with the general population. And now it's a more severe substrain of flu potentially getting spread around. Fourth, the year was 1918, and we did this one already, but remember, there were no antiviral drugs. There were no antibiotics. There were no breathing machines. There were no ways to deal with respiratory failure, pneumonia, sepsis, and all the rest of the stuff other than stick you in a bed and hope you recover. People were starting to understand the basic principles of infectious diseases and epidemiology, but really that pales with today's coordinated responses and understanding of medicine. Fifth, Europe was in the middle of a war, and we did that one already. Okay, the year was 1918. We did that one already too. Okay, but look, a lot of European powers were colonial powers, and that meant that people and goods were now moving at a turbocharged rate between countries all over the world. An influenza virus cannot swim from Europe to Asia or Africa, but it sure as hell can get there by boat or plane inside of an infected person. Now, this contributed to global spread and multiple waves of infection between 1918 and 1920. Number 6. The virus itself. We can talk about it now. It was just particularly nasty. This was too long ago to say for sure how it came to exist, but the most likely theory is that it jumped from birds to people, again, probably through reassortment. But this particular strain was not super adapted to people and triggered hyperactive and damaging immune responses in the lungs, meaning it killed faster and harder than a typical flu. About 2 decades ago, a group of scientists working in Canada got the genetic sequence of the original Spanish flu virus from old tissue samples, used those samples to resurrect it, and injected this virus into monkeys, who got far more sick and died far more often than the monkeys injected with modern seasonal flu. Now, depending on your perspective, this experiment is either extremely alarming or just so incredibly cool, but while it clearly demonstrates there was something extra lethal about the virus in monkeys, and by extension, probably people, it doesn't answer the question why, which is an important question because knowing why something kills you is an important step in drug discovery and medical treatment. 20 years on from that experiment, and we are unfortunately still largely in the dark. So that's 6 reasons why the Spanish flu was as bad as it was, and I could probably think of a few more, but the thing you got to notice here is that 5 of them had absolutely nothing to do with viral biology, and do not, except for the ease and volume of global travel, represent the world as it is today. The Spanish flu really was a worst-case scenario, a virus with exceptional lethality spreading in some of the worst conditions possible. So, let's assume we get a new influenza strain that's as inherently dangerous as the Spanish flu, and release it into the world. As a thought experiment. Just a thought experiment. What would that pandemic look like today? Well, in all likelihood, it will look like COVID, but maybe COVID light. Probably half as impactful and half as long, but still ultimately painful. There have been a ton of great advances made in the last 100 years in flu management and prevention, but at the end of the day, the title of this video stands. Flu is a 9 out of 10 disease for a reason. It is very hard to stop the flu. As of April 2025, a strain of bird influenza has been infecting cows for about a year. This is happening only in the United States, so far, but cattle infections are being reported all over the country. A related strain is circulating in farmed chickens. These domestic poultry and livestock have been spreading this form of influenza to people. According to the latest public data by the US CDC, 70 people have been infected by contact with one of these strains, with most infections mild, but with 1 fatality so far. In its current form, the bird/cow flu doesn't seem to be very good at infecting human lungs, unlike its seasonal cousin, and the infection generally stays at the point of contact, such as the eye when the eye is splashed with infected milk. So far so good, right? Except, the more contact there is between people and infected animals, the greater the chance that by a random freak accident, an animal strain of influenza virus evolves to infect people, and spread, and get progressively better at doing this. Or, in what is considered a much more likely scenario, a person already infected with regular seasonal flu gets infected with the animal variety, and these 2 viruses hybridize through reassortment. So this new virus that I've made, in my thought experiment, is based on animal flu, but adapted to spread in people. And the infected person, or patient 0, starts to spread it to colleagues and family. The hypothetical patient 0 is probably not going to get seriously sick, because most of the flu in their system was the regular seasonal flu, and they're well enough to come to work. But the people they infect, or maybe the people those people infect, might get quite sick if our theoretical new flu is deadlier and better at spreading than the seasonal variety. Now, here is the last chance to stop this virus from going pandemic mode, because the US government is fully aware that the cattle and bird flu virus is a serious risk. If any of those early infected end up in a hospital, there's going to be an aggressive effort to isolate and treat anyone who is potentially exposed. So, if it gets caught early enough and hasn't spread outside a small community, it can be stopped. But let's say, hypothetically, that it's too late, or it happens somewhere without a structured monitoring and contact tracing program. The 2009 swine flu, for example, originated in a highly rural region of Mexico on someone's family farm. Well, at this point, the virus will begin to spread regionally as people travel for commerce and to visit friends and family. And the more it spreads, the faster it spreads. From there, it reaches a major urban center, and with the ease of travel, including international travel, and the general freedom of movement available in the modern world, influenza is going to spread like wildfire. And at this point, I think you all can imagine it, or maybe you don't need to. Maybe you just remember. Someone is going to end up in the hospital with influenza symptoms, then someone else, then someone else. The tests come back, the alarm bells ring. New York, Paris, Calcutta, Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, H5N1 in big letters spread across news headlines and social media. More hospitalizations, first in trickles, then in waves. The scramble for materials and resources, the first death, the 10th, the 1000th. The morgues start churning, the crematorium starts spewing smoke, panic, alarm, government action, again. Social distancing initiatives, again. Masking, work from home, again. Sadness, desperation, loss, again. Angry men shouting at each other on podcast and video, again. My D&D game gets moved online, again. But this time, there will be 3 important mitigating factors. The first is I have 2 cats, which is more cats than I had last time, so I personally feel more prepared. The second is that we won't have to wait as long for vaccines, and the third is that we have antiviral drugs with proven effectiveness against influenza. So let's break these factors down in a bit more detail. First mitigating factor, cats. Cats are great. Second mitigating factor, the speed of the vaccine rollout, also known as the time you're sitting at home waiting for a vaccine. Except we already have the vaccine. Kind of. Several vaccines have been or are being developed to the strain of the bird/cow flu that's circulating right now. Other vaccines cover closely related strains from a few years ago. Some are available now, and your government probably already has strategic stockpiles. In fact, Finland has already started vaccinating. So, in our hypothetical outbreak, important people, essential workers, and maybe doctors and nurses, if they've been good, can get a vaccine within a week or 2 of release. This is because, unlike COVID, which was a brand new disease nobody was expecting, everyone was expecting bird flu for a long time. We have the genetic sequences and biological stockpiles of currently circulating strains. We roll out influenza vaccines every single year for seasonal flu. I won't go into the details of how they're developed. There are multiple methods, and some are faster and some are slower, but the infrastructure is there, and the rest is plug and play. If you have a circulating viral strain, be it from people, birds, or anything else, you can produce a vaccine quickly. And you don't have to rely on one company in one country to do it. They're manufactured all over the world, and they're approved all over the world as well. There's a discussion to be had about how you know the vaccine you make today will work on a virus you see tomorrow, after it has a chance to cycle around and mutate in both animals and people. And it's complicated. I don't really have time to get into it, but basically, math and prior experience with seasonal flu says that a strategic bird flu vaccine manufactured today should work to prevent infection, or at a minimum, keep you out of the hospital, at least if the pandemic strain emerges within a year or so. Even in the worst case scenario where the strategic vaccine doesn't work because the virus accumulated some crazy mutations, or we get blindsided out of left field with some obscure H16 strain of flu from geese in Norway instead of the H5 flu from America like we're all expecting, you'll still have a functional vaccine available to you in 6 to 9 months, most places in the world. Mitigating factor number 3 is antiviral drugs. Drugs against influenza exist, and they're already being used in the clinic, and they have been for years. There are 4 in use right now. 3 of them attack neuraminidase, which stops influenza from leaving infected cells. 1 of them stops RDRP from making more viral RNA, which stops influenza from replicating. In the hospital, these drugs cut your risk of dying by 20% or more. They're also useful for prophylaxis, which means giving them to people who have been exposed to someone who has the flu to stop those people from getting sick. This is a mechanism of viral control we did not have during the COVID pandemic. And what it means overall is that less people will get sick and less people will die before the vaccine rollout hits. Widespread community use of these drugs also means that the pandemic influenza will rapidly evolve drug resistance and come back the following years as seasonal influenza, but now in a highly drug-resistant form. This, however, is a future humanity problem. We know for a fact that influenza will evolve drug resistance because a class of antiviral drugs called amantadines are no longer used to treat the disease. They just don't work anymore. With amantadine, this process happened over 6 to 10 years of normal use. In the case of mass antiviral administration during a pandemic, it's going to happen a lot faster, but it's going to happen regardless, and regardless, in the future, we are going to need new drugs. So that's it. Infection, hospitalization, mortality, treatment, vaccination, recovery. That is all you really need to know about influenza, seasonal or pandemic. The one big thing I didn't tell you about is what H5N1 actually means, how it's different from H1N1 or H3N2. I don't plan to go too deep into it. Maybe I'll make a brief video about it later. Leave a comment if you want to see that and a like. Please like my video. There will be bunnies in the explanation. Questionable ethics and bunnies, seriously, but I'll give you the TLDR. It is a classification system for different influenza serotypes going around. It's useful for professionals for various reasons. It's useful for the media because H5N1 is scary, is a digestible soundbite. What it means for you is if you get infected with a hypothetical H12N200 flu and then get infected with it again next year, you'll have more immunity to this strain, even though it's changed and evolved, than, for example, a hypothetical H4N400 flu. So now it's time. It is time to finally rate influenza. Influenza? Pretty great. Infectiousness, 9 out of 10. Almost a perfect score. It's a beast. Its only weakness is that it can't survive long-term outside of a human body like some of the hardier viruses. Adaptation, 8 out of 8. Perfect score. It evolves rapidly and can jump from animal to human hosts better than any other virus. Gameplay.
Hi.
7 out of 10. Unmodified lethality, 4 out of 10. Unmodified lethality asks, just how deadly is the virus without any medical intervention? This is the score for the seasonal influenza variant, which is, if you think about it, still pretty deadly, especially in the elderly, even with medical treatment. Intimidation factor, 2 out of 10. Now, a low score here is good, generally, if you're a virus. Go high enough and humanity might conspire to wipe you out. As it stands, the average person does not consider influenza to be threatening despite the best efforts of the medical community, and that is just how influenza likes it. Renown, 10 out of 10, another perfect score. If you have heard of an infectious disease, you've heard of the flu. It's an A-list celebrity of the pathogen world, the kind you've definitely seen and heard of, but doesn't really stand out much and fills pretty generic roles. It's kind of like, I don't watch movies. Chris of Hollywood. Hollywood Chris, but to viruses. Leave a comment to share what other things you would like ranked. Out of 10. Overall score, 9. I absolutely love the flu. It's kind of like a comfort food, but prepared in a world-class restaurant. You know, maybe doesn't have the wow factor of other things on the menu. Maybe it's not the in thing right now, although it probably will be soon, but it is genuinely lovely. And it's got hidden depths. Thank you all for watching, and this has been Virus Wars. If you want more viruses, or bacteria, or that very alarming worm that we talked about that does very scary things, please let me know, and show your appreciation. Remember, the true horrors of biology are just a few clicks away.